Hey everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and up here on the bench, all set to go, is our 126-day-old worm bin. Worms that were recruited from the compost we got out of the harvest of my compost barrel outside. And we we had taken all that compost indoors, we allowed it to dry some time, and then over the course of three different worm haul outs of three different batches of compost, we ended up populating this thing. So, like I said, three separate haul outs. I think it was over the course of 9 days, because it was, I think, 9 days later that I technically felt like I was starting into the cocoon nursery that is what accompanies this system. The cocoon nursery is in this fabric bag over here, and oh, well, let's see, it's pretty heavy. Just gonna slide it in over here. In the past, I'd always put down like a little bit of a piece of paper right beneath it because it was sometimes soaking through a little bit of its moisture. Today I felt underneath it and it seemed like it was pretty dry, so it seemed safe just to put it directly up on the table without damaging my lovely tablecloth. As I do sometimes, I've compiled a little bit of information, and here in the cocoon nursery we have already done one haul out, and that was 24 days ago. Things went well, and I believe it was because of the way we had set up the bait. The bait was a bunch of fresh paper and cardboard. It's my typical high carbon bedding mix. It's just shredded paper, shredded cardboard. I throw leaves in there and stuff like that, so it's just kind of a boring bedding. But I dressed up the bait with some yummy foods. And between the fresh bedding and the yummy foods, it did seem like it was a pretty popular thing. I can't remember what the estimated haul out count was, but we did all kick in our estimates for how many worms we thought we saw during that haul out, and we updated the tally. And if we haul worms out again today, well, then we'll be upping the number of worms in the adult bin by that many. We were keeping really good to a 14-day interval on these baiting attempts in this system here. In fact, every interval between baiting setups and check-ins was 14 days, exactly 2 weeks, but today it's only 10 days because I know for a fact that on day 14, or on the day that it would be another 14 days since this bait was set up, I won't be around, and I just happen to have time now, so I thought that now would be the right time to check this setup and see how it did. So I guess one thing worth trying a lot of times is to just set aside the actual bait box and check to see if perhaps right near the bait box maybe there's a few worms that were maybe still on their way in and just hadn't gotten there yet. Oh, like this guy. Definitely seems old enough, so probably wasn't, I don't know, probably had no problem, would have had no problem getting in there, because the openings are pretty good size. This is just one of those plastic containers when you buy cherry tomatoes that the cherry tomatoes come in. I guess we can give them this stuff too. Because all we're going to do is empty this thing out, and I've got a feeling we are probably going to be moving worms over into the adult bin today. I'm really questioning whether or not we need to reset this thing at this point. It might be done. So in comes our trusty little container that we can empty this thing into, and oh, where'd our little friend disappear to? Turn your back for a second and these little guys vanish. I know, it's a cheesy gag and I just used it in the other video the other day. Maybe it'll become my new trademark. Alright, for now I guess we'll just level things off so we have a platform that we could rest our little empty box into. A little bit more space to inspect what went down here. Now, the last time we hauled worms out, they had gone through every shred of shredded paper, shredded cardboard, leaves, my bedding mix. they transformed every last bit of it into castings. There was not even one little piece of paper remaining as leftovers. So they were apparently very hungry for carbon food source, it seems. And here too, there's just a huge number of castings in here. Obvious evidence of a lot of worm traffic. Just a lot of these castings are just stuck to this little bait box, and you can see these holes all around the bottom. Makes it really easy for the worms to make their way in. So let's get a sense of how many worms came out for the party, and I'm really starting to get the sense that the baiting of this might be complete, because the material beneath the bait box was pretty much free of any worms. That I didn't see any. Oh no, we did catch that one vanishing act guy. But yeah, other than that, one guy, and it took a little bit of digging to stumble on him. We didn't really see much of anything down in the bait box. I don't know. I don't continue. I could see that this is leftover worm chow, our most recent mix, I believe. I think. I'm trying to remember what kind of materials. I think there were like sort of salad-like materials. Lettuce bits, tomato bits. But this doesn't resemble that. I think we did use worm chow, and that might be what's lingering in here as leftovers still. And you can still see here and there a piece of my shredded cardboard mix, and some of it's probably just blending in with this little package of worms and compost. But it certainly does seem like we've reached that optimal point where what was in the baiting box was something that the worms certainly preferred to what they had just been in previously, so none of them seem to have left after they turned out for this little party here. And you know, they've even got enough stuff in here, it seems, to last them, you know, perhaps even another couple weeks if they had to. There's bedding, there's leftover worm chow, maybe even, I thought I saw maybe what was the skin of a tomato, not that that amounts to much, but there's also the very fact that all of the castings that they're leaving behind are still so super rich in nourishing materials that they can keep reheating that stuff multiple times. I think half a dozen times or so before all the nutritional values depleted from it. So it might seem a little gross, but it really amounts to them having plenty of stuff to hang out in and eat in here. But I think the time has come for us to set this aside. We'll release these guys into the adult bin when we get it out here to feed. But I think we've also got to come to the determination here whether or not further baiting of the material has any potential for rounding up any remaining worms. I mean, just in case it doesn't show on the video, this stuff is super dry and almost feels devoid of moisture, that dry. As I scrape inwards, it does seem like the material still has a little bit of moisture lingering down with that in the heart of the collection of compost. And that's only because it's sort of guarded from ventilation and further drying and evaporation by being at the core. So I don't know if we really need to explore the outer reaches much, because it is just so dry. I seriously doubt any worms would be capable of surviving in it. So if there's going to be any lingering worms, you would think they've got to just be somewhere here in this middle material, perhaps having made their way downwards so far down that they just somehow didn't sense the baiting station. Although, I don't know, I'm really getting the sense that there's not any worm population remaining. Oh, it's always when I here again, I don't want to continue repeating things that I say in previous videos, but it did seem like there was a similar moment in the previous video where you're just about to sort of make a semi-conclusive statement that this is material devoid of any worms, and I could have sworn I saw a little wormy. And then he was gone. So there's always that reality check that you need to continuously place upon yourself when you're trying to see if you could maybe pull out any more worms. You know, when it's something like this where you might still know there's one that you saw and you missed and now you got to go find them. Yeah, it's just, I think it's fair to say that if there are any, there are very, very, very few. And if there are any, hopefully I'll get around to using this stuff out in the garden soon enough. Perhaps I could even sort of, just to give any remaining worms that are still in here a break that I missed in my baiting and haul out attempts. Maybe we just drop a little bit of moisture down into here for any little guys that might need it, because moisture is super important for the wormies. They breathe through their skin, so I wouldn't want to subject any of the worms that just never made it out of this stuff to a torturous death. I just want to keep this stuff moist enough to sustain them until the material gets used outdoors. But I think it's time to feed the adult bin, so let's get moving with that. Here we go. And well, we're talking about a much smaller container here. So I believe we can bring the camera down a bit. Get a somewhat closer look at what we're working on here. And, you know, this is going to be a feeding for these guys too, so I'm going to have to take a short break once we get to a point where it would be appropriate to do so I can shoot upstairs and grab them some food. Unless for whatever reason we decide that worm chow alone would be a great feeding for them today. Wow, you know, it's amazing because in all my systems the flying insect situation has all but vanished, and in here I'm still seeing little flying insects all over the place. There's some on the paper that we just removed. They're crawling around on the bottom side of it. The reason we went to that paper last week, it was to replace the bubble wrap that had been on here. So the idea was to allow this stuff to begin losing some of its excess moisture. And I believe that's kind of what we observed here, that this system does at this point have way more moisture than it really needs. There seems to be a pretty good number of worms in here doing a really nice job. They are leaving behind piles of beautiful castings. I don't even know if I see any substantial bedding material amongst this stuff. These guys have pretty much turned everything into black gold over there. Guess let's just kind of keep going with the two edges and then we'll make our way to the center. The center is where we fed last, I believe. Even though we didn't really have an indication of where it had been done most recently. Usually we leave a little marker or something to steer us back to where we last fed. But since we're not really doing any sort of a special feeding approach or pattern here, we can always assume that we're just sort of defaulting back to my de facto feeding approach, which is to feed right down the middle. So right down the middle is where we would expect to find any leftovers, but you know, tomatoes, lettuce, maybe some worm chow and coffee. I don't know. Those are the things that come to mind, I believe, is what we gave them 10 days ago last check-in here. So there might not be a whole lot of leftovers of that. If you start factoring in that, you know, this bin does seem to have a good number of worms in it, just from what we've seen here on the two outer edges. I wonder what we'll see down the middle, where the food was. Sometimes it almost seems like the worms prefer just being away from the food. Out and away, maybe looking for some better bedding to hang out in. These guys seem like they could really use a good heavy-duty boost of fresh bedding to play around in, because they've just shredded what I've given to them up until now, or at least so it seems. I don't recall the detail of how generous we were with bedding last time, but hopefully we gave them a good bit. We'll get to see now. So let's look for lettuce chunks, tomato chunks. Yeah, I think after 10 days it seems a bit unlikely. Perhaps the one thing to look for is maybe some residual signs of the bedding we put in here. I believe that's what I'm seeing kind of clumping together here. All this is leftover shredded paper, which is perfect. I think we even saw the skin of a tomato here. Is that what that was? Sure looks that way. Feels that way too. Things look pretty nice in here. I like the fact that we're sort of blending in all this residual bedding material with the neighboring castings. It feels like it gives all of that stuff a really good chance at getting further broken down. And then eventually we'll actually create a big hole down the middle and push everything to the side, so all this stuff that's been sort of blended in will gradually make its way out more and more each time we feed. Maybe that's the reason the outskirts of the system seem to be so popular, because what's being pushed out there could still be material that's not yet broken down and is actually now at that stage where the worms can really begin taking advantage of it. Wow. As much as I want to be generous with bedding, I feel like after everything gets tilled up and aerated and piled high to make room for a new feeding, we are getting close to the rim, it seems. I'm sure all this will collapse down as the worms start plowing through it and consuming it and converting it to castings, and everything else will just settle naturally due to gravity. It's really good that we get to break up all these chunks of paper too, because whatever paper was right there in the middle of that bundle that I broke up there a second ago wouldn't have really received a whole lot of worm attention, I think. But now that it's free of being surrounded by like materials, it too now has direct access to worm traffic. Alright, we don't need to excavate right to the bottom. I got nowhere to stack this stuff. Alright. I gotta take a break, get some food for these little guys. So many little itsy bitsy worms on my glove. Gotta be careful not to haul any of them over to the sink when I get ready to go upstairs to get them some food. So I'll be right back. Maybe these little guys will keep you company while we're away. You may have noticed when we first came in here, the flying insects. I actually got to the point where I was already halting my use of this mosquito dunks solution that I've got in my applicator bottle here. It's mainly because I've seen pretty much such a drop in the flying insects everywhere in my wormery that it seems like I don't really have much of an issue going on here. But obviously this system's still damp enough that they're hanging out in here, so we're gonna help show them the door. Alright, got a special guest for you here. We're gonna be feeding some stuff that my mom provided, specifically the cantaloupe melon. And it's not going to be me feeding them. It's
but
my
I
mom.
will.
Oh, wait. You know what? Let's give them a little bedding before we drop in the food.
Yes, where's the bedding?
It's this stuff here. You feel like using your clean hands to apply it?
No, thank you.
Luckily, I've got a glove on. Let's use my glove.
It's totally dry. I see.
It's not totally dry.
It looks dry.
Luckily, there was a good bit of bedding in here already, so you can start dropping in. You know what I usually do? I'll sprinkle the coffee in, but don't give them the filter yet.
And all the coffee?
Sure,
all
dump it in.
All of it? That's a lot of coffee.
Yeah, spread it out evenly. You just send it across the whole bottom, and then we can blend it in with some of that surrounding bedding. Here, I'll give you some more bedding.
Yes.
I like being generous with bedding, in case you didn't know.
Okay.
Oh, that
now,
looks good.
bedding again.
Sure, let's give it to them. Now, I don't have my grit here, so we'll skip giving them grit. Otherwise, we could have started blending that in here too. But you know what? I'm going to give them a little generous portion of this stuff too, in case the gnats try to go down after the food. They're going to intercept that stuff too.
Yes.
Oh, worm chow?
Yeah.
Let's give them some of that too.
Okay. And
actually, the next ingredient we're going to be including in the next batch of worm chow includes birdseed, which is also compliments of my mom. So stay tuned for that.
A carrot.
Nice.
And another carrot.
These are frozen. Oh, it's all frozen.
I hope they can tolerate this.
That's a jalapeno pepper.
And here goes cantaloupe and another cantaloupe.
Do you remember how this stuff tasted? This stuff with the really light color skin?
It's very, very interesting. It's much harder in texture. It's very crispy, very sweet. It's wonderful. I met a lady, a Korean lady, and she was helping me pick out the best. And she said the larger this area is, the sweeter the cantaloupe will be. And it is very, very good. Try it. It's worth it.
All right. I'm not sure you. I I'll dig it. All right, excellent. It's so nice to have a little help down here in the wormery, and especially when it's one of the benefactors of the food that they get. So here again, since this might be the very last of my systems that still has some of these flying insects buzzing around in it, I think it's probably a good idea to return with the application of the BTI mosquito dunk solution, in this one at least for the time being.
And the worms?
Yep. Yeah, oh geez, I almost forgot. I thought we were done here, but we gotta release those little wormies we collected out of the nursery bin. Oh my goodness. Thank you for reminding me, Mummy. Mummy's, by the way, my name for mom. In case you didn't know. And since we fed down the middle, we'll follow tradition. We'll put our feeding zone indicator right there once we've released the baby worms. But let's set this aside so we can get to the action. All right, here we go. And as usual, I'm always interested in hearing what the viewers think in terms of how many worms we spotted in here. And when we pulled them out of the bait box earlier, we got a little view of them. But here we'll get another chance to peek at them before they all squirm down. So please, in your comments, let me know how many worms you think we're adding to the system. Here we go. All right, I'll spread them out a little bit. Help them all get direct access to the material below. And that gives me time to escort Mom out. She's in a hurry. All right.
Enjoy the video. I always do. Thank you.
Well, I've got to say, I'm really pleased with the fact that we've finally brought an end to the materials that made up the compost barrel. And it took a while. Definitely took a while. It was a lot of material. You know, it was in that grow bag. It was a lot of material. It took a long time for it to, I believe, reach that dryness level that it really did sort of spur on the movement of the worms to the collection area without much delay. I think if the stuff had been pretty damp still, we would probably still see the material, you know, loaded with worms. I think it was the drying of the material that, you know, motivated them to come out. So yeah, I look forward to hearing what everyone thinks in terms of how many worms we just added to the system. As you saw before on the green board, the number of worms that we think we've got in here so far, using everyone's estimates, is approximately 1,190 worms. And now I'm already kind of formulating a number that I think is right for how many worms we just added. So curious to hear what everyone else thinks. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.